The Quarren invasion should have been over in an instant. From their warships, stationed just beyond Earth's orbit, the Quarren fleet loomed like silent predators, their sleek, dark hulls nearly invisible against the blackness of space. The commander of the fleet, General Thaler Zarn, sat confidently on his command throne, surrounded by his psionic elite, their minds linked in a shimmering web of thought. They had done this 100 times before. One pulse of focused will, and the minds of an entire species would bend. The humans, primitive and emotionally volatile, would be no different. "Ready for insertion, General," one of the telepaths reported. Zarn nodded, his eyes gleaming with anticipation. He could already picture the humans, their weak wills crumbling, their leaders falling into line like docile animals. Commence the pulse. Across the Quarren fleet, the telepathic web surged with power. Invisible tendrils of mental energy stretched from the alien vessels toward Earth, seeking out the minds of every human being. The humans would soon feel a pressure, a compulsion they couldn't resist, the overwhelming weight of Quarren while pressing down on their thoughts. Zarn leaned forward in his seat, waiting for the reports of success. But as the seconds passed, nothing came. His brow furrowed. There should have been confirmation by now. "Status?" Zarn demanded. The telepath at his side looked confused, her eyes narrowing as she concentrated. "Something's wrong," she whispered. "The humans, they're not reacting." "What do you mean, not reacting?" Zarn barked. "They're ignoring us," she stammered, her voice tinged with disbelief. "It's as if they don't even notice the pulse." Zarn's stomach twisted. "Increase the intensity," he ordered. "Full power." The telepathic web flared, doubling its efforts. But still, nothing. The humans continued their lives, completely unaware of the invisible battle for their minds. Zarn's eyes flicked to his second in command, Major Kuros, whose own expression had gone from confident to bewildered. "This is impossible," Kuros muttered. "No species has ever resisted our will." Zarn clenched his fists. "Then push harder." The telepath strained, their minds working in perfect synchrony, pouring their collective might into the pulse. The sheer force of the Quarren's psychic power should have been enough to overwhelm even the most resilient of species. But the humans, they remained completely unfazed. Then, something happened that no one in the Quarren fleet could have anticipated. A laugh, soft at first, but unmistakable. Zarn blinked, unsure if he had imagined it. But then he heard it again, and this time it echoed across the telepathic link, as if carried by the humans themselves. It was the sound of someone laughing, an amused, carefree laugh that seemed to mock the very effort of the invasion. "What is that?" Kuros whispered, his eyes wide with disbelief. More laughter followed, not just from one voice, but from thousands, maybe millions. The humans were laughing at them. The realization struck Zarn like a blow. The humans knew what was happening, and they thought it was funny. "This is impossible," he hissed, his mind racing. How could this primitive species resist the most powerful psychic assault in the galaxy? "They're mocking us," one of the telepaths gasped, her face pale with shock. "We've never encountered anything like this." Zarn's face twisted in fury. "Prepare for a direct assault," he growled. "If their minds won't bend, we'll make them break." The Quarren fleet mobilized, warships gliding into position for a full-scale planetary assault. But even as Zarn gave the order to engage, the humans' laughter rang in his mind, growing louder, as if daring them to try. Down on Earth, Captain Elias Drake sat in the command center of an underground bunker, watching the readouts on the screen in front of him. The Quarrens had made their move, just as his team had predicted. The alien ships hovered ominously in low orbit, their psionic energy pulsing like a second sun over the planet. But despite the immense power being thrown at them, the humans were fine. "Still nothing," Drake muttered, shaking his head. "Unbelievable." Beside him, Lieutenant Marcus Hale chuckled. "They've got to be losing their minds up there. All that effort, and it's like trying to hypnotize a brick wall." Drake grinned. It had taken humanity decades to prepare for the possibility of an alien psychic invasion. After years of research, they had discovered something remarkable: human minds, with all their stubbornness and chaotic emotional layers, were practically immune to outside influence. It wasn't something that could be engineered or trained, it was simply how human brains worked. Their neural pathways were too unpredictable, too resistant to external manipulation. The Quarrens had no idea what they were dealing with. "Incoming message from the Quarren fleet," one of the communications officers announced, her voice tinged with excitement. "Put it through," Drake said, leaning back in his chair. The holographic projector flickered to life, and the towering figure of General Zarn appeared before them, his pale, elongated face twisted with frustration, his black eyes fixed on Drake. "Human," Zarn spat, his voice dripping with contempt. "You will cease this insolence and surrender. You cannot resist the Dominion's power forever." Drake chuckled softly, then exchanged a glance with Hale. "Surrender? Why would we surrender when you can't even get past our front door?" Zarn's eyes narrowed. "You are delaying the inevitable. Our psychic abilities are beyond your comprehension. We will break your minds." Drake couldn't hold back a laugh. "Break our minds? You couldn't even give me a headache." The room erupted in laughter, the other officers joining in as Zarn's image flickered with rage. "You underestimate the Quarren Dominion," Zarn snarled. "This planet will burn." Drake's expression sobered slightly, though the amusement never left his eyes. "You're welcome to try," he said, "but let me make one thing clear: you're in for a hell of a fight. And I can promise you this, we're not going to make it easy for you." Zarn's hologram disappeared in a flicker of static, but the threat hung in the air. The Quarrens were preparing for war, and humanity would need every ounce of its resilience to survive. But as the tension in the room began to rise, Drake found himself smiling once again. The Quarrens had made one critical mistake. They thought they could control humans, but humans didn't bend so easily. And now, they were about to find out just how dangerous a laughing human could be. High above Earth, aboard the Quarren flagship, General Zarn stared at the empty screen where the human captain had just been. His mind whirled with disbelief and fury. This was supposed to have been an easy victory, a simple application of their superior psionic abilities to subjugate another weak species. Instead, they were facing a nightmare scenario. The humans weren't afraid. They weren't even trying to fight back, not in any conventional way. They were laughing. They were mocking the Quarren Dominion, as if the threat of total domination was nothing more than a joke. And that was the most terrifying thing of all. General Thaler Zarn paced the length of his command bridge, his mind boiling with rage and confusion. The humans should have been under their control by now. Their pathetic resistance was a cosmic joke, an affront to everything the Quarren Dominion stood for. The Quarrens had never failed to subjugate a species through their psychic powers, not once in all the centuries of their rule. But now, not only were they failing, the humans were mocking them for it. "Prepare the fleet for bombardment," Zarn ordered, his voice low and lethal. "But General, the human cities," Kuros began. "We'll burn them to the ground if we have to," Zarn snapped. "These creatures cannot be allowed to defy us. They will submit, or they will die." Kuros gave a hesitant nod, clearly unsettled. The Quarrens had rarely needed to rely on brute force. Their psionic abilities rendered traditional warfare obsolete until now. But even as Kuros relayed the order to the fleet, a nagging question ate away at Zarn's mind. Why were the humans immune? How could their minds resist the Quarrens' overwhelming psychic dominance? Zarn turned to the telepathic unit gathered at the rear of the bridge. "Continue your efforts," he barked. "Find a way in. I want these humans crushed beneath the weight of our will." The telepaths, drained from their earlier attempts, exchanged worried glances but nodded. They knew the cost of failure. Far below, on Earth's surface, Captain Elias Drake stood outside the bunker, gazing up at the distant specks of light that marked the Quarren fleet. The stars seemed calm, but he knew the aliens were anything but. The Quarrens were probably having a collective meltdown up there, trying to figure out why their supposedly infallible psychic powers were being laughed off by a species that still enjoyed cat videos. Drake's communicator crackled to life. "Sir, the Quarrens are moving into bombardment position." He sighed, glancing over at Lieutenant Hale, who stood nearby, arms crossed. "Guess they're done playing mind games." Hale grinned. "Looks like it." Drake activated his communicator. "Command, status on our orbital defenses." A voice crackled through the static. "Orbital defenses ready, Captain. We've been tracking their movements. If they fire, we'll intercept." "Good," Drake replied. "Let's hope it doesn't come to that, but I'm not holding my breath." Hale turned, his smile fading slightly. "Do you think they'll actually bomb us?" Drake shrugged. "They've never had to use brute force before. If they do, it'll be because they're desperate." "Which means they've already lost." Drake grinned. "Now you're getting it." The Quarren fleet hovered in low orbit, positioned above Earth's major cities. General Zarn watched as the bombardment teams took their positions, ready to rain destruction upon the humans. But just as the command to fire was about to be given, something strange happened. One of the bridge officers, a young Quarren named Relak, let out a sudden gasp. His eyes went wide, and his hands trembled as he clutched at his head. "General, there's something," Relak stammered. Zarn whirled on him. "What is it?" Before Relak could answer, another officer fell to his knees, groaning in pain. Then another. The telepathic web, which connected all Quarren officers in the fleet, was suddenly racked with violent feedback. The mental strain was unbearable, like a high-pitched scream reverberating through their minds. Zarn himself felt the edges of his consciousness blur. It was as if the human's immunity was turning into something worse, a force pushing back against the Quarrens, making them vulnerable in a way they had never experienced. "What is happening?" Zarn gritted through his teeth, trying to maintain control of his own mind. "We don't know, General," one of the telepaths gasped, clutching her temples. "Their resistance. It's like—" Zarn's eyes widened in horror. It wasn't just resistance. The humans were pushing back, and it was tearing the Quarren minds apart. Inside the bunker, Drake's team was monitoring the Quarren fleet's movements when a new report came in. "Sir, we've intercepted some comms chatter from the Quarren ships," one of the communications officers said, her voice tinged with surprise. "It sounds like they're in trouble." Drake raised an eyebrow. "Define trouble." "I'm not entirely sure, but there's some kind of feedback occurring in their telepathic network. Their systems are going haywire." Drake exchanged a glance with Hale, who gave a knowing smirk. "Guess they weren't ready for the mental pushback, huh?" Hale leaned back in his chair, arms folded. "You think this is what we expected?" Drake shook his head. "Not exactly. We knew they wouldn't be able to control us, but causing them to implode? That's new." He tapped his communicator, linking up with the researchers in the base. "Dr. Wu, any theories on why the Quarrens are suddenly falling apart up there?" Dr. Anna Wu's voice crackled through the speaker. "Captain, we've been analyzing their psionic wave patterns since they began their assault. It seems that human brains aren't just resistant, they're actively rejecting the psionic energy. The more the Quarrens push, the more violent the feedback." Hale let out a low whistle. "So, we're not just immune, we're dangerous." Dr. Wu chuckled dryly. "It appears so. I can't explain exactly why yet, but I have a theory. Human brains are uniquely wired with chaotic, unpredictable patterns, emotion, humor, irrationality. These things make us fundamentally incompatible with their form of telepathy. So their perfect control breaks down when it hits our imperfect minds," Drake mused. "Figures." "But there's something else," Wu added, her voice growing more serious. "The feedback is escalating. If the Quarrens don't stop, it could cause irreversible damage to their entire fleet." Drake raised an eyebrow. "How bad are we talking?" "Catastrophic. They could start losing control of basic motor functions, even consciousness." Drake leaned forward, his mind racing. "How long before they figure it out and back off?" "Hard to say," Wu replied. but I wouldn't count on them backing off anytime soon. Their pride might make them push harder, even if it kills them. Zarn's head throbbed as he tried to regain control of the situation. His telepaths were falling apart, their minds fracturing under the strain of human resistance. The feedback was growing worse with each passing minute, sending waves of pain and confusion through the entire fleet. Kuros stumbled to his side, his eyes wild with panic. "General, we need to withdraw. The fleet." "Silence," Zarn snapped, though his own voice trembled with fear. "We are the Quarren Dominion. We do not retreat." "But the humans?" "They are vermin," Zarn roared. "They cannot defy us." Even as he spoke, another telepath collapsed, blood trickling from his nose as his body convulsed. The bridge was filled with the sounds of groans and cries, as Quarren officers struggled to maintain control of their own minds. For the first time in his life, Zarn felt the cold grip of fear. The humans weren't just resisting, they were destroying the Quarrens from within. "We need to pull back," Kuros insisted, his voice rising in desperation. "If we don't, the fleet will." A loud explosion rocked the ship, sending Zarn tumbling to the floor. Lights flickered, and alarms blared as the crew scrambled to their stations. "What happened?" Zarn shouted, struggling to his feet. "Energy overload in the psionic core," one of the officers cried. It's destabilizing." Zarn's mind raced. The humans had somehow turned their psychic resistance into an attack. The Quarren fleet was tearing itself apart, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. With a snarl of rage, Zarn slammed his fist against the control panel. "Order the fleet to withdraw," he spat, the words bitter on his tongue. "We will return to the capital and regroup. This isn't over." But even as the order was given, Zarn knew the truth. The Quarrens had been defeated by a species they had considered inferior. And the worst part, the humans were still laughing. Captain Drake stood outside the bunker, the cold night wind brushing against his face. He watched the Quarren fleet flicker and waver as it struggled to maintain cohesion. To anyone else, the sight of hundreds of alien ships in low orbit might have been terrifying, but to Drake, it was a reminder of what humans could achieve when pushed to the brink. The Quarrens were retreating. The sky above Earth was growing clear again. "Sir, reports are coming in from across the planet," Hale said, stepping up beside him. "The Quarrens are withdrawing from every major city. It looks like the mental backlash hit them harder than we thought." Drake smirked. "They weren't ready for us. Thought they could just waltz in and take over." Hale chuckled. "Psychic control over humans. Bad bet." Drake's communicator buzzed, and he tapped it. "Drake here." "Captain, this is command," came the voice of Admiral Costas, calm and authoritative as always. "We've confirmed the Quarren withdrawal, but we're detecting unusual energy signatures across their fleet. Their psychic cores are destabilizing. If they don't pull out of orbit soon, they may start losing ships." "Understood," Drake replied. "Any word on what caused this?" "We knew their mind control wouldn't work, but this feedback is something else." There was a pause on the other end. "We're still investigating. Dr. Wu and her team have some theories, but nothing concrete yet. For now, assume the worst. If they collapse, they could crash into Earth's surface." Drake frowned. "So now we have to worry about them dropping out of the sky." "Possibly, but there's another issue. Command wants you to lead a team to intercept one of the Quarren vessels before it escapes. We need more intel on their fleet structure and their psionic technology." Drake glanced at Hale. "You think they'll just let us waltz onto one of their ships?" "Not a chance," Hale replied, arms crossed. "But if they're in chaos, it might give us an opening." Drake returned to the communicator. "Roger that, Admiral. We'll prep a strike team." "Good. I'm sending you the coordinates of a Quarren cruiser that's still lingering in orbit. It seems to be lagging behind the rest of the fleet. Get up there, get what you can, and get out. I don't want to lose any more people than we have to." The transmission ended, and Drake turned to Hale. "Looks like we're going in." Hale nodded. I'll get the team ready." The transport shuttle hummed as it ascended into the sky, piercing the upper atmosphere and leaving Earth's surface behind. Inside, the strike team prepared for what was ahead. Hardened veterans, each one carrying the weight of Earth's survival on their shoulders. Drake sat across from Hale, both of them checking their gear and going over the mission plan. "If the Quarrens are still reeling from the feedback, we might be able to board with minimal resistance," Drake said. Hale, always practical, didn't seem convinced. "That's a big if, sir. Even if their minds are scrambled, their automated defenses could still be up." "We'll cross that bridge when we get there," Drake replied, strapping his helmet on. One of the team members, Sergeant Mathies, leaned forward. "Captain, what do you think we'll find on their ship? You think we'll get a chance to see their psychic tech up close?" Drake looked at Mathies, a young man with eager eyes. "Let's hope so. But remember, this isn't a sightseeing tour. We get in, grab what we can, and get out. We don't know how long their fleet will stay in orbit." Mathies nodded, his expression growing more serious. The team fell into a focused silence as they neared their target. The Quarren cruiser loomed ahead, its sleek, organic design glistening against the backdrop of space. Its hull was lined with pulsing veins of energy, an eerie reminder of the alien technology that had nearly conquered them. "Ready for approach," the shuttle's pilot said, guiding them toward the docking port. "No signs of active defenses, but I'm keeping the shields up just in case." Drake stood up, his pulse quickening. "We go in fast and quiet. Stick to the mission, and we'll be back before they know we're there." The team assembled at the shuttle's exit ramp, weapons drawn. As the docking clamps engaged, the hiss of pressurization filled the cabin. Drake gave the signal, and the ramp lowered. They stepped into the belly of the Quarren ship, the air thick with an odd, metallic scent. The corridor stretched ahead, dimly lit by the ship's faint internal glow. It was silent, unnervingly so. Hale motioned for the team to fan out, covering the entrance as they moved deeper into the vessel. "Keep your eyes open. If something feels off, call it out." The deeper they went, the stranger things became. The ship seemed abandoned. No sign of Quarren soldiers, no sounds of footsteps or movement, just an eerie stillness. "I don't like this," Mathies whispered. "Where is everyone?" Drake stopped at an intersection, scanning the area. "Maybe they're all affected by the feedback. We knew it was hitting their minds hard." "Hard enough to leave their ship undefended?" Hale asked, skeptical. Drake didn't answer. He wasn't sure what to think. The Quarrens were prideful, but they weren't foolish. Leaving a ship completely unguarded didn't make sense. As they moved further into the ship, they finally encountered their first signs of life barely. A Quarren officer lay slumped against the wall, his body twitching sporadically. His eyes were wide and vacant, staring into nothingness as if his mind had been completely unraveled. Drake knelt beside him, checking for signs of life. The officer was still breathing, but his consciousness was gone. "Whatever the feedback did, it hit them harder than we thought," he muttered. Hale glanced around, wary. "What's stopping it from hitting us?" "We're not linked to their psychic network," Drake said, standing up. "Their minds are wired into it constantly. When the feedback hit, it probably overwhelmed them." Mathies shuddered. "Remind me not to underestimate the power of human chaos." They continued down the corridor, passing more Quarren crew members in various states of collapse. Some were unconscious, others writhing in mental agony, their minds shattered beyond repair. Finally, they reached the heart of the ship, the psionic core. The room was bathed in a pulsating, violet light, emanating from a massive, crystalline structure at its center. Tendrils of energy arced through the air, connecting to various consoles and conduits. The core itself seemed to pulse in sync with the psychic energy that had once linked the Quarren fleet. Drake approached the core, his eyes narrowing. "This is what they've been using to project their control across planets. It's their source of power." Hale moved to one of the consoles, examining the readouts. "It looks like the core is still active, but it's destabilizing. If this thing goes critical, it could take the whole ship with it." Drake nodded. "That's our ticket. We need to download as much data as we can from this core and get out of here before it blows." Matthijs pulled out a data spike, moving to one of the nearby consoles. "On it, Captain. Give me a few minutes." As Matthijs worked, Drake couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The silence, the lack of resistance, it all felt too easy. He glanced at Hale, who seemed to share his unease. "Keep an eye on the exits," Drake said quietly. "We're not alone here." Just as the words left his mouth, the lights in the room flickered. A low hum filled the air, growing louder by the second. The core pulsed violently, sending a shock wave of energy rippling through the room. Matthijs stumbled back from the console, his eyes wide with fear. "Captain, something's wrong. The core's, it's waking up." Before Drake could react, the core emitted a blinding flash of light. The air around them seemed to ripple, distorting reality itself. And then they weren't alone. Quarren soldiers materialized from the shadows, their eyes glowing with a fierce, unnatural light. They moved with deadly precision, weapons raised, their minds seemingly shielded from the feedback that had crippled the rest of the fleet. "Ambush!" Hale shouted, raising his rifle and firing at the nearest soldier. Drake dove for cover, returning fire as the room erupted into chaos. The Quarrens had sprung their trap, and now it was a fight for survival. Drake rolled to his feet as plasma bolts zipped past his head, slamming into the bulkhead behind him. The ambush had come fast and hard, with the Quarren soldiers appearing out of nowhere, their eyes burning with alien fury. These weren't the mind-shattered crew members they'd seen earlier. This was a tactical strike force, shielded from whatever psionic backlash had ravaged the rest of the fleet. "Take cover," Drake shouted, firing his rifle in short bursts. He aimed for center mass, hoping their shields weren't strong enough to handle concentrated fire. The plasma bolts hit, sizzling against the Quarren's armor, but they kept advancing. Hale crouched behind a console, his expression grim. "We need to neutralize that psionic core, or they'll keep coming." "I know," Drake shouted back, ducking as another volley of plasma fire ripped through the room. He scanned the area, searching for a weak point in the core's structure. The crystalline centerpiece continued to pulse with energy, its power growing with each passing second. Matthijs, still shaking from the shockwave, scrambled to get the data spike back into the console. "Just need a few more minutes," he shouted over the noise, his fingers flying across the console's interface. "We don't have minutes," Hale replied, gritting his teeth as he fired another round at the advancing Quarrens. One soldier dropped, but two more took his place, their movements coordinated and unnervingly precise. Drake's mind raced. They needed to buy more time, but with the Quarrens' numbers growing, it wouldn't be long before they were overwhelmed. He glanced at the core again. If they could destabilize it completely, maybe they could take the entire ship out in one blow. "Hale, Matthijs, fall back to the corridor," Drake ordered, his voice steady despite the chaos. "We're going to set this core to overload." Hale fired one last shot before nodding. "Got it. Matthijs, move." Matthijs yanked the data spike free, the screen in front of him flashing as it finished downloading what it could from the alien systems. "I've got the intel. Let's get out of here." They moved quickly, retreating into the corridor they had come through. As they did, Drake tossed a small, disc-shaped charge toward the base of the psionic core. It latched onto the crystalline structure with a faint click, its countdown timer beginning to tick down. "Charge set. 30 seconds, Drake yelled, laying down suppressive fire as the Quarrens closed in. Hale dragged Matthijs behind a bulkhead, their backs pressed against the cold metal wall as the firefight raged on. Drake sprinted after them, narrowly avoiding a plasma bolt that scorched the ground where he had just been standing. The Quarren soldiers advanced, their movements fluid and unnaturally synchronized. Drake could feel the pressure building. The soldiers were relentless, pushing forward despite the losses they were taking. But the charge had been set, and time was on their side now. 10 seconds, Drake called out, his heart pounding as they reached the docking bay. He slammed his fist against the shuttle's entry panel, and the ramp lowered just as the Quarrens rounded the corner. Plasma fire erupted from both sides as Drake and Hale covered Matthijs, who dashed up the ramp into the shuttle. "Let's go, let's go," Matthijs yelled, eyes wide with fear. Drake fired a final burst before sprinting up the ramp. Hale was right behind him, his breathing heavy but steady. As soon as they were inside, the shuttle's pilot lifted off, pulling away from the Quarren cruiser just as the timer on the charge hit 0. A blinding explosion rippled through the ship, followed by a chain reaction as the psionic core detonated. The shockwave blasted outward, tearing through the hull of the cruiser and sending debris flying in every direction. The force shook the shuttle violently, and Drake gripped the seat in front of him as the vessel veered sharply to avoid the explosion. For a moment, there was only silence. Then, the shuttle stabilized, and Drake let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. The Quarren cruiser was gone, a field of wreckage where it had once been. "Status?" Drake asked, his voice hoarse from the adrenaline. "We're clear," the pilot replied. "Minimal damage to the shuttle, but that blast wave nearly took us out." Drake turned to look at the rest of the team. Hale was bruised but unharmed, his helmet tucked under one arm. Matthijs, pale and shaken, was still clutching the data spike like it was his lifeline. "We did it," Matthijs said, his voice trembling. "We actually did it." Hale nodded slowly. "That was close." Drake sank into one of the shuttle's seats, rubbing a hand over his face. They had destroyed the psionic core, but the mission wasn't over yet. The data on that spike could hold the key to understanding the Quarren's psychic technology, maybe even give Earth an edge in the war. "Get that spike to command as soon as we land," Drake said, his voice firm despite his exhaustion. "We need to know what we're dealing with." Back at command, Admiral Costas stood in front of a large tactical display, reviewing the situation with grim intensity. The Quarren fleet was still withdrawing, but there were signs of renewed movement, small groups of ships breaking off from the main fleet, likely preparing for a final counterattack. The door to the command room slid open, and Drake entered, followed by Hale and Matthijs. "Captain," Costas greeted him, though her tone was serious. "We've been monitoring the situation. Your mission was a success, but the Quarrens aren't giving up. What's on that spike?" Matthijs handed the data spike to one of the technicians, who immediately began decrypting the contents. "We're not sure yet," Matthijs said, his voice still shaky. "But if it's anything like what we saw on that ship, we're going to need every bit of intel we can get." Costas turned her gaze to the tactical display. "We're detecting significant energy fluctuations from the remaining Quarren fleet. It's possible their psychic network is collapsing entirely, but that might also make them more desperate. If they launch a final strike, it could be catastrophic." Drake stepped forward, eyes fixed on the display. "What's our next move, Admiral?" "We're preparing a coordinated strike on the remaining Quarren ships," Costas replied. "But if they're as unstable as we think, we need to be careful. One wrong move, and we could trigger another psionic backlash." The technician working on the data spike looked up, his face pale. "Admiral, you're going to want to see this." Costas and Drake moved to the console, where a series of alien schematics were displayed on the screen. It was a detailed layout of the Quarren psionic network, a vast, interconnected system of nodes, each one capable of amplifying and directing psychic energy on a planetary scale. But there was something else. Hidden within the network's architecture was a failsafe, a final contingency plan the Quarrens had put in place in case their psychic control was broken. "It's a self-destruct mechanism," the technician explained, his voice tight with concern. "If their control over the fleet is compromised, they'll detonate the remaining ships. It's a last-ditch effort to take us down with them." Drake's jaw tightened. "How long do we have?" The technician typed a few commands into the console, pulling up additional data. "It's hard to say, but if their network is already destabilizing, they could trigger it at any moment." Costa straightened, her expression hard. We need to disable that failsafe before it's too late. Captain Drake, I'm assigning you to lead a strike team. Your mission is to infiltrate one of the remaining Quarren command ships and shut down their self-destruct mechanism." Drake nodded, already preparing himself for the next fight. "Understood, Admiral. We'll take care of it." The shuttle hummed with a quiet intensity as it sped through the void of space, approaching the lead Quarren command ship. This time, there would be no time for subtlety, no chance to scout or gather intel. They were going in hard, with the fate of Earth hanging in the balance. As the ship loomed larger in the viewport, Drake's focus sharpened. The Quarrens had pushed them to the brink, but humans had always thrived in the face of impossible odds. And this time would be no different. The docking clamps latched onto the side of the Quarren command ship with a hollow thunk. The shuttle hummed as the interior pressurized to match the atmosphere inside the alien vessel. Drake stood at the airlock, his hands tightening on his weapon as he waited for the door to open. Behind him, Hale and Matthijs were ready, their faces set in grim determination. "Remember," Drake said, turning to his team, "this ship is on high alert. We're not here to fight our way through the entire crew. Our only objective is to reach that core and disable the failsafe. No distractions." Hale gave a curt nod, his eyes gleaming with focus. Matthijs swallowed hard, but nodded too, gripping his gear with shaky hands. The airlock hissed open, revealing the interior of the Quarren ship. The corridor beyond was dimly lit, the walls lined with intricate, alien carvings that pulsed faintly with psionic energy. The hum of the ship's systems filled the air, creating an eerie, oppressive atmosphere. Drake took point, moving silently down the corridor, his rifle raised. The team followed close behind, their footsteps barely audible as they advanced deeper into the ship. They hadn't gone far when they encountered their first obstacle, a pair of Quarren soldiers patrolling the corridor. Drake held up a fist, signaling for the team to halt. "Take them quietly," he whispered. Hale nodded and moved up beside Drake, pulling a knife from his belt. They crept forward, staying low to the ground. In a swift, practiced motion, Hale struck. His blade slid into the first Quarren's neck, severing the spinal cord before the alien could react. The second soldier turned, but Drake was already moving. He drove his knife into the alien's side, twisting the blade to ensure a quick kill. The bodies slumped to the floor, and Drake motioned for Matthijs to follow. They continued down the corridor, pausing occasionally to check for more patrols. The deeper they went, the more oppressive the atmosphere became. The walls seemed to pulse with a low, psychic hum, as if the ship itself were alive, watching them. Finally, they reached a large, circular chamber at the heart of the ship. At the center of the room stood the psionic core, an enormous crystalline structure, much larger than the one they had destroyed on the first cruiser. It pulsed with raw energy, and Drake could feel the pressure in his mind as they approached, the alien presence pressing against his thoughts. "This is it," Drake whispered. "Matthijs, get to work." Matthijs hurried to a nearby console, plugging in his decryption tools. His fingers flew across the alien interface, trying to bypass the ship's security systems. Come on, Matthijs muttered, his brow furrowed in concentration. As they waited, Drake scanned the room, keeping his rifle trained on the entrances. He could feel the tension rising, the psionic hum growing stronger, vibrating in the air like a silent scream. "Got it," Matthijs said suddenly, his voice filled with relief. "I've disabled the failsafe. They won't be able to trigger the self-destruct." Drake exhaled, a weight lifting from his shoulders. "Good work. Let's move before." An alarm blared through the ship, cutting Drake off mid-sentence. The lights in the chamber flashed red, and a low, droning sound reverberated through the walls. "They know we're here," Hale barked, raising his rifle. Drake cursed under his breath. "We need to get out, now." But before they could move, the doors to the chamber slid open, and a wave of Quarren soldiers flooded in, their weapons drawn. The team was surrounded. Drake's heart raced. There were too many to fight their way through. They'd been caught. One of the Quarrens stepped forward, a tall figure clad in ornate armor. His eyes glowed with psionic energy, and his presence filled the room like a suffocating fog. "You should have stayed away, human," the Quarren said, his voice a deep, resonant growl. "Now you will die." Drake gritted his teeth, his mind racing. They were outnumbered, outgunned, and cut off from their escape route. But there was still one card they could play. "Matthijs," Drake whispered, keeping his eyes on the Quarren commander. "Can you overload the core?" Matthijs's eyes widened in realization. I think so. But if I do, we won't have much time to get out." "We're not leaving," Drake said, his voice cold. "We're taking them down with us." Hale glanced at Drake, understanding dawning in his eyes. "You sure about this, Captain?" Drake nodded. "It's the only way. Get ready." Matthijs's fingers flew across the console again, inputting a series of commands to initiate the core's overload sequence. The crystalline structure at the center of the room began to pulse more violently, its energy level spiking. The Quarren commander tilted his head, sensing the shift in the room. "What are you doing?" he demanded, his eyes narrowing. "Ending this," Drake replied, his voice steely. The commander's eyes flared with anger, and he raised his hand, channeling a wave of psionic energy toward the team. Drake felt the pressure in his skull intensify, like invisible fingers digging into his mind, trying to crush his will. But as the psychic assault hit, something unexpected happened. Drake didn't flinch. The pressure was there, but it wasn't overwhelming. It was almost laughable compared to the raw terror he had felt when the psychic wave first hit the fleet. He grinned, feeling the tension in his mind evaporate. "You're going to have to try harder than that, pal." The Quarren commander's expression faltered, confusion flashing across his face. He tried again, pushing harder with his psionic attack, but Drake barely felt it. "Humans," the commander muttered, his voice laced with disbelief. "How?" Drake's grin widened. "We're tougher than you think." The core's energy levels were reaching critical, and the room was filled with the sound of crackling electricity. The Quarrens began to panic, realizing what was happening, but it was too late. "Matthijs, get back!" Drake shouted, pulling Matthijs away from the console as the core began to glow with a blinding light. The Quarren commander snarled in fury, lunging toward Drake, but Hale was faster. He fired his rifle, the plasma bolt catching the commander in the chest and sending him sprawling to the floor. "Go!" Hale shouted, dragging Matthijs toward the nearest exit. The core was seconds away from detonation. Drake and Hale sprinted toward the airlock, Matthijs stumbling behind them. The ship shuddered as the overload reached its peak, and Drake could feel the heat of the energy building behind them. They made it to the airlock just as the core exploded. The blast wave hit the ship with the force of a small star, tearing through the hull and sending debris flying into space. The shuttle's docking clamps released automatically as the shockwave hit, and the small vessel was thrown clear of the explosion. Drake was slammed against the bulkhead, his vision blurring as the shuttle tumbled through space. The sounds of alarms and the groaning hull filled the cabin, but somehow they were still intact. The shuttle's pilot, miraculously still conscious, pulled them out of the spin, stabilizing the ship as the debris field spread out around them. Drake groaned, pushing himself to his feet. His body ached, and his ears were ringing, but they were alive. We made it," Matthijs said, his voice weak with disbelief. Hale chuckled, though it was more a sound of exhaustion than humor. "Barely." Drake looked out the viewport. The Quarren command ship was gone, reduced to a cloud of dust and twisted metal. The rest of the Quarren fleet was still out there, but without their command structure and without their psionic failsafe, they wouldn't be able to launch the coordinated strike they had feared. They had won. Hours later, back aboard the Earth fleet's flagship, Drake stood in the war room, watching as the remaining Quarren ships withdrew from the battlefield. Earth had held the line. The Quarren invasion had been repelled. But Drake knew this was only the beginning. As the Quarren threat retreated, the galaxy would soon learn just how strong humanity had become. They had faced the Quarren's greatest weapon, their psionic mind control, and laughed it off. Now, it was humanity's turn to push back. The command deck of the Ticonderoga was abuzz with activity. The moment Drake's shuttle docked with the flagship, he was greeted with a mix of cheers and hurried reports. Officers scrambled to assess the fallout of the Quarren command ship's destruction and the effect it had on the enemy fleet. "Status report," Drake barked as he strode across the deck, his uniform still smeared with soot from the explosion. Lieutenant Vargas, the tactical officer, rushed to meet him. "Captain, the remaining Quarren forces are in disarray. It looks like their command structure collapsed after you disabled the core. They're retreating in multiple directions with no cohesion." Drake nodded, though the fatigue in his bones was palpable. "And our losses?" Vargas hesitated. "We lost 2 frigates, sir. Several others are heavily damaged. Casualty reports are still coming in." The weight of that hit Drake harder than any psychic blast could. "Damn! Get me the full reports as soon as possible." He turned toward the observation window, gazing out into the black expanse of space. The debris field from the Quarren ship still glimmered in the distance, a reminder of how close they had come to losing everything. The human fleet was battered but alive, a testament to their resilience. Behind him, Matthijs and Hale stepped onto the deck, both looking worse for wear but still standing. "Good to see you back in one piece," Drake said, turning to them with a grim smile. Hale shrugged, his usually sharp demeanor dulled by exhaustion. "Barely. Matthijs saved our skins back there." Matthijs, normally quiet, gave a nervous chuckle. "Just doing my job, Captain. Though I'd rather not have to disable another core anytime soon." Drake nodded. "Let's hope we don't have to." Before he could say more, a voice chimed in over the intercom. "Captain Drake, we have Admiral Hansen on the line. He's requesting a debriefing." Drake sighed. "Patch him through to my quarters. Matthijs, Hale, you're with me." The 3 of them made their way to the captain's quarters, where a holo terminal displayed the stern face of Admiral Hansen, the commander of Earth's defensive forces. His grizzled features were set in a hard frown, but his eyes glimmered with something close to pride. "Drake," Hansen said, his voice gruff, "I've just received the reports. Seems like you and your team pulled off a miracle." Drake stood at attention. "We were lucky, sir. The Quarrens weren't prepared for us to adapt so quickly to their psionic tech." "Lucky or not, you've given Earth a fighting chance," Hansen replied. "The Quarren fleet is retreating, but we don't have time to celebrate. We're picking up chatter from their forces they're regrouping at their home system. This war isn't over." Drake's heart sank. He had expected as much, but hearing it confirmed was a bitter pill to swallow. "What's the plan, Admiral?" Hansen's image flickered for a moment as he pulled up a galactic map. "We're going on the offensive. The Quarrens are still reeling from their loss, but if we give them time to recover, they'll come back even stronger. We can't afford that." Drake studied the map. The Quarren homeworld was heavily fortified, surrounded by a dense cluster of defense platforms and warships. Taking the fight to them would be no easy task. "We're not equipped for a full-scale assault on their homeworld," Drake said, voicing the obvious. "We'd be walking into a death trap." Hansen's frown deepened. "You're right, but we have something they don't know about, a new weapon we've been developing in secret, something that can punch through their defenses." Drake exchanged a glance with Hale and Matthijs. "What kind of weapon?" Hansen's face took on a grim smile. "Project Thalassa, an energy weapon designed to overload and neutralize psionic fields. It's still experimental, but if it works, it'll give us the edge we need." Drake raised an eyebrow. "And if it doesn't?" "We'll be vaporized before we get anywhere near their homeworld," Hansen replied bluntly. "But we're out of options. Earth can't withstand another invasion." Drake knew the stakes. The Quarrens had been preparing for this war for centuries, and humanity had only just begun to scratch the surface of their capabilities. The next encounter could decide the fate of both species. When do we move? Drake asked. In 72 hours, Hansen said. The weapon is being fitted onto the Avalon, and we'll be deploying the fleet for a final push. I want you and your team aboard that ship. You've already proven you can handle their psionic weapons better than anyone else. Drake felt the weight of the responsibility settle on his shoulders. Understood, sir. Hansen gave a curt nod. Good. I'll send the details to your terminal. Rest up, Drake, you've earned it. The transmission ended, and the holo display flickered out. For a moment, the room was silent. Then Hale let out a long breath. So, we're the tip of the spear again. Lovely. Matthijs sat down heavily in one of the chairs. An experimental weapon against a psionic race. I don't know if we're crazy or just desperate. Drake rubbed his temples. A bit of both, I'd say, but we don't have a choice. Hale stood and crossed his arms. We've beaten them once, we can do it again. Whatever this Project Thalassa is, we'll make it work. Drake appreciated Hale's confidence, but the nagging doubt remained in his mind. The Quarrens weren't just any enemy, they were a species whose entire culture and technology were built around psionics. Taking the fight to them on their home turf was like walking into a nightmare. But Drake had never been one to back down from a fight. We'll make it work, he said finally, his voice firm. We have to. The next 2 days passed in a blur of preparation. The crew of the Ticonderoga worked tirelessly, repairing the damage from the battle and resupplying for the upcoming assault. Drake and his team were transferred to the Avalon, a sleek, heavily armed battleship that housed the new Thalassa weapon in its bowels. Drake's first glimpse of the Thalassa weapon was both awe-inspiring and terrifying. It was a massive, cylindrical device, surrounded by layers of shielding and conduits that hummed with barely contained energy. The engineers spoke of it in hushed tones, like priests discussing a volatile god. It's supposed to work by destabilizing the psionic frequencies the Quarrens use, one of the engineers explained. In theory, it'll create a feedback loop that will render their psionic fields useless, maybe even cause damage to anyone trying to use them. Drake nodded, though the explanation did little to quell his unease. The theory was sound, but in practice, they wouldn't know until it was too late. On the eve of the assault, Drake gathered with Hale, Matthijs, and the rest of his team in the Avalon's war room. The atmosphere was tense, but there was a grim determination in the air. They knew the odds, but they had come too far to back down now. Drake stood at the head of the table, a holo display of the Quarren homeworld spinning slowly above him. This is it, he said, his voice cutting through the tension. We take the fight to them. We end this war. No retreat, no surrender. Hale cracked his knuckles. Just the way I like it. Matthijs gave a shaky smile. Here's hoping that weapon does what it's supposed to. Drake looked at each of them, feeling the weight of their lives in his hands. We fight for Earth, for everyone who's counting on us. No matter what happens out there, we make sure the Quarrens remember who they're up against. Hale gave a sharp nod, and Matthijs did his best to follow suit. The countdown to launch ticked closer, and Drake could feel the tension building. In 72 hours, they would either save humanity or watch it burn. The launch from the Avalon was smooth, almost too smooth. Drake had anticipated turbulence, given the experimental nature of Project Thalassa. Yet, as the massive battleship hurtled through space toward the Quarren homeworld, it felt as though everything was happening in slow motion. The view outside the observation window was serene, stars twinkling in the void, with the ever-shrinking human fleet clustered in formation behind them. Despite the tranquil scene, tension gnawed at him. The closer they got to their destination, the more he could sense the unease among the crew. He stood at the helm, his mind racing. Hale and Matthijs flanked him, both equally absorbed in their thoughts. You ever get the feeling that you're standing on the edge of something monumental? Matthijs asked quietly, his voice barely above a whisper. Every day, Hale grumbled, never one for sentimentality. But today feels different. Drake turned toward the two of them. This is bigger than any battle we've faced so far. The Quarrens will throw everything at us. We're heading into the heart of their power. Matthijs paled. And if that weapon doesn't work? It'll work, Drake replied, more to convince himself than Matthijs. We don't have another option. Before either could respond, the intercom crackled, and the voice of Commander Erickson, the ship's Zo, filled the room. Captain Drake, please report to the weapons bay. We're prepping the Thalassa for final calibration. Drake nodded to his team. Let's go see what our miracle weapon looks like up close. The weapons bay was a hive of activity, engineers and technicians buzzing around the colossal cylinder that housed the Thalassa. The weapon's shimmering core pulsated with energy, casting an eerie glow across the dimly lit chamber. Drake approached one of the lead engineers, a wiry man named Jansen who looked like he hadn't slept in days. What's the status? Jansen ran a hand through his greasy hair. We're nearly ready, Captain. The power readings are stable, and the containment fields are holding. But I won't lie to you, this thing is volatile. One misstep, and we could end up blowing ourselves to pieces. Drake studied the device. It was impressive, certainly, but there was an almost sinister feel to it. It was more than a weapon. It was humanity's last hope against an enemy that outmatched them in almost every way. He turned to Jansen. How long until we're ready to deploy? 2 hours, give or take, Jansen said. We're finishing up the final calibrations. After that, it's in your hands. Drake nodded. Keep me updated. He turned to leave but paused. And Jansen, good work. I know it hasn't been easy. The engineer gave a tired smile. Thanks, Captain. We'll get it done. As the hours ticked away, the Avalon moved deeper into Quarren space. The human fleet was holding formation, but there was an unspoken understanding among the crew: if the Thalassa weapon failed, they wouldn't be returning home. Drake found himself back on the bridge, staring at the tactical display. The Quarren homeworld, Valetherin, was now within striking distance. It loomed large on the map, its defensive platforms lit up like stars on the horizon. It was an ominous sight, a fortress world that had never been breached. Vargas, the tactical officer, broke the silence. Captain, we've detected multiple enemy fleets converging on our position. The Quarrens aren't waiting for us to come to them. Drake clenched his jaw. How long until they're in range? 30 minutes, maybe less, Vargas said, his hands flying across the console. They've deployed a vanguard of destroyers ahead of their main fleet. We're outnumbered. Of course we are, Hale muttered. Wouldn't be a proper fight if we weren't. Drake turned to Vargas. Bring all ships into defensive formation. We hold the line until the Thalassa is ready to fire. Vargas nodded and began relaying orders. The human fleet shifted into position, forming a tight defensive net around the Avalon. They were vastly outgunned, but Earth had never backed down from a fight, and they wouldn't start now. Commander Erickson, status on the weapon? Drake asked over the intercom. We're ready, Captain, Erickson replied. Thalassa is primed and operational, waiting on your orders. Drake felt a chill run down his spine. This was it. The moment they had been preparing for, the culmination of everything they had fought for. If they failed, Earth was doomed. He turned to his crew. Get ready. We fire as soon as the Quarrens are in range. The minutes stretched on, each second an eternity as the Quarren fleet closed in. The vanguard of enemy destroyers was the first to come into view, their sleek, predatory ships weaving through the stars like sharks circling their prey. They're almost in range, sir, Vargas said, his voice tight with anticipation. Drake leaned forward. Prepare to engage. Hold fire until I give the order. The tension on the bridge was palpable, every officer's eyes locked on the tactical display. The enemy was close now, so close that Drake could see the faint glimmer of their warships through the observation window. Then, without warning, the Quarrens opened fire. A barrage of energy blasts streaked toward the human fleet, lighting up the void in a deadly display of firepower. The Avalon shook as the first salvo hit their shields, but the ship held firm. Return fire, Drake shouted. The human fleet unleashed their own volley of missiles and plasma bolts, cutting through the darkness toward the advancing Quarren ships. Explosions rippled across the battlefield as ships on both sides took damage, but it was clear the Quarrens had the upper hand. For every one of their ships that fell, 2 human vessels were disabled or destroyed. "We're not going to last long like this," Hale muttered as the deck rattled beneath them. Drake knew he was right. The Quarrens had superior numbers, superior firepower. Their only hope was the Thalassa. "Are we in range?" Drake asked, his voice steady despite the chaos. Vargas glanced at his console. "Almost, now." Drake didn't hesitate. "Fire the weapon." The command was relayed, and the lights on the bridge dimmed as power was diverted to the Thalassa. For a moment, everything was eerily quiet, the only sound the faint hum of the weapon charging. Then, with a deafening roar, the Thalassa unleashed its fury. A blinding wave of energy erupted from the Avalon, cascading outward in all directions. It was unlike anything Drake had ever seen, a surge of raw power, shimmering with a strange, almost otherworldly light. The energy wave washed over the battlefield, engulfing both human and Quarren ships in its wake. For a heartbeat, Drake feared the weapon had malfunctioned, that they had all been caught in the blast. But then he saw the Quarren ships, their shields flickering and collapsing, their weapon systems sputtering out of control. The energy wave had destabilized their psionic fields, just as the engineers had predicted. "It's working," Vargas shouted, his voice filled with awe. Drake watched in disbelief as the Quarren fleet faltered, their ships drifting helplessly through space. They were defenseless, their psionic technology rendered useless. "Focus all fire on their command ship," Drake ordered, his heart pounding. The human fleet responded with a renewed sense of purpose, targeting the massive Quarren dreadnought at the center of the enemy formation. Plasma bolts and missiles rained down on the crippled ship, tearing through its hull. Within moments, the Quarren command ship exploded in a brilliant flash of light, taking with it the last hope of their fleet. The battlefield fell silent. The aftermath of the battle was surreal. The human fleet, battered and bruised, had emerged victorious against all odds. The Quarrens were in full retreat, their forces scattered and broken. Drake stood at the observation window, staring out at the wreckage of the enemy fleet. It was over. The Thalassa had worked, and Earth had been saved. But as the adrenaline began to fade, a strange unease crept into his mind. The Quarrens had been defeated, yes, but something didn't feel right. It was too easy. "Captain," Hale said, approaching him, "we did it." Drake nodded slowly. "Yeah, we did." But in the back of his mind, the nagging doubt remained. Why had the Quarrens been so unprepared for the Thalassa? What were they really planning? The days following the battle were a blur of repairs, strategic meetings, and a cautious sense of victory. The Avalon had survived, along with most of the human fleet, but the scars of battle were evident across the hulls of their ships. The Thalassa weapon had performed beyond expectations, delivering the crushing blow that had crippled the Quarren fleet. Yet Drake's unease lingered. He stood on the bridge, watching the crew work as they analyzed the aftermath. The calm after the battle was unsettling, like the eye of a storm. "What's on your mind, Captain?" Hale asked, standing beside him. Drake shook his head. "I can't shake this feeling. It was too easy. Hale, we've been fighting the Quarrens for years, and they've always been one step ahead. Then we roll in with a new weapon, and suddenly they fall apart." Hale leaned against the console, folding his arms. "You think they let us win?" "I don't know." Drake sighed. "Something about this doesn't add up. The Quarrens had to have known we were coming. They should have had a countermeasure in place, but they didn't, and that's not like them." The sound of approaching footsteps interrupted their conversation. Commander Erickson stepped onto the bridge, a grim look on his face. "Captain, we've detected something unusual in the debris field." Drake raised an eyebrow. "Unusual how?" Erickson handed him a data pad. "One of our recon drones picked up a transmission fragment from the wreckage of the Quarren dreadnought. It's encoded, but we managed to decipher part of it. Take a look. Drake scanned the data pad. His eyes narrowed as he read the garbled message. Phase 2 initiated. Valtheran coordinates confirmed. Prepare for assimilation. Project Nexus complete. What the hell does that mean? Matthijs asked, who had wandered over. Drake's mind raced. Phase 2? Assimilation? Sounds like the Korans had a fallback plan. Maybe the defeat here was just the first step in a larger strategy. Hale frowned. What's Project Nexus? Drake's stomach churned as the implications of the message settled in. I don't know, but whatever it is, it involves Valtheran, their homeworld. Erickson nodded. We should investigate. If the Korans have some kind of last-ditch plan in motion, we need to stop it before it's too late. Drake stared at the tactical map, where Valtheran loomed like a distant shadow. The idea of going deeper into Koran space, especially after the battle they just fought, was daunting. But they couldn't turn back now. If the Korans had something more sinister in store, they had to know. Prep the fleet, Drake ordered. We're heading to Valtheran. The journey to the Koran homeworld was tense. Every crew member aboard the Avalon felt the weight of the unknown pressing down on them. The fleet's repairs were hurried, and though they had won a major victory, there was no time to savor it. They had to keep moving, had to uncover the mystery behind the cryptic message. As they approached Valtheran, Drake stood in the war room with his senior officers, reviewing the latest scans of the planet. Valtheran is heavily fortified, Vargas said, displaying the readouts on the holographic table. Massive planetary shields, orbital defense platforms, and an entire fleet stationed in orbit. They've been licking their wounds, Matthijs muttered, probably regrouping after the beating we gave them. Drake wasn't so sure. He studied the planet, his gut telling him there was more to this than regrouping. We need to get a closer look. Any signs of the Korans mobilizing? Not yet, Vargas replied. But if Project Nexus is some kind of contingency, they won't wait long. Hale cleared his throat. Captain, I don't like the idea of walking into a trap. This could be their way of drawing us in, luring the fleet to Valtheran to wipe us out in one go. We don't have a choice, Drake said. We're here to end this war, and that means cutting off the Koran command at its source. There was a pause as the officers exchanged glances. They knew the risks, but there was no turning back. Send out recon drones, Drake ordered. We need more intel before we make our move. The recon drones zipped through the vast expanse of Koran space, feeding back a stream of data to the fleet. Drake, Hale, Matthijs, and the others watched as the information painted a clearer picture of what awaited them. Something's wrong, Vargas said as he examined the latest scans. There's no movement. No ships leaving orbit, no defensive maneuvers. It's like they're waiting. Waiting for what? Matthijs asked, his tone edged with suspicion. Drake narrowed his eyes. They know we're here. They're just not acting like it. Suddenly, the tactical map flickered, and a new signal appeared. Captain, Erickson said, looking at his console, we're picking up an energy spike on the planet's surface. Massive power surge, deep underground. Could that be Project Nexus? Matthijs asked. Possibly, Vargas said, his fingers flying over his controls. But whatever it is, it's generating enough energy to power a fleet. Drake's pulse quickened. Is it a weapon? Unknown, Vargas replied. But whatever it is, we can't let it activate. Drake nodded. Prepare the fleet for assault. We hit Valtheran hard and fast. Take out their orbital defenses and find a way to disable whatever's generating that energy. Hale gave a grim smile. Finally, time to knock on their front door. The human fleet surged toward Valtheran, their engines burning bright as they closed in on the Koran defenses. The planet's orbital platforms came to life, spitting energy blasts and missiles at the approaching ships, but the human fleet was ready. They maneuvered with precision, dodging incoming fire and returning their own, tearing through the Koran defenses. The battle in orbit was fierce, but the humans had the advantage of momentum. The Quarrens, still reeling from their defeat at the hands of the Thalassa, struggled to keep pace. Drake stood on the bridge, his eyes locked on the tactical map. "Focus fire on the defense platforms. We need to punch through before they can regroup." The avalanche shook as a barrage of enemy fire grazed their shields, but they pressed forward, driving the fleet deeper into the heart of the Quarren defenses. "Captain," Vargas said, his voice tense, "we've breached their orbital defenses, but that energy spike on the surface, it's still climbing. Whatever they're doing, it's accelerating." "Damn it," Drake muttered. "Prepare for a ground assault. We need to get down there and shut it down." As the fleet continued to engage the remaining Quarren forces in orbit, Drake turned to Hale and Matthijs. "Get the drop teams ready. We're going to lead this one ourselves." Hale grinned. "About time we get some action planetside." Matthijs, however, was more reserved. "I hope you know what you're doing, Drake. If this goes sideways—" "I know the risks," Drake said, cutting him off. "But we don't have a choice. If Project Nexus is what I think it is, we can't afford to let it complete." The drop ships hurtled toward the surface of Vale, slicing through the planet's thick atmosphere like daggers. Drake, Hale, and Matthijs were strapped into the lead craft, their faces set with grim determination. Around them, the strike team prepared for the worst. As the ships neared the ground, the landscape of Vale came into view. It was a desolate world, its surface scarred by centuries of war and industry. Massive structures rose from the earth like monoliths, each one a testament to Quarren power and domination. But it was what lay beneath the surface that concerned Drake the most. "We're approaching the target site," the pilot said over the comm. "Energy readings are off the charts. Whatever's down there, it's big." Drake glanced at Hale and Matthijs. "Get ready. Once we land, we move fast. No room for hesitation." The drop ships touched down in a barren valley, not far from the source of the energy readings. As the doors slid open, Drake stepped out, his boots crunching on the rocky soil. The air was thin and cold, with an acrid scent that burned in his lungs. Ahead of them, a massive underground facility loomed, its entrance carved into the side of a mountain. The energy readings were strongest from within. "That's it," Matthijs said, his voice low. "Project Nexus." Drake nodded. "Let's move." As they advanced toward the facility, a sudden burst of movement caught Drake's eye. He turned just in time to see a squad of Quarren soldiers emerging from the shadows, their weapons raised. "Ambush!" Hale shouted, diving for cover. Drake drew his pistol and fired, the sound of gunfire echoing through the valley. The Quarrens returned fire, but the humans were better trained, more disciplined. Within moments, the alien squad lay dead at their feet. "Clear!" Hale called out, standing up and dusting himself off. Drake holstered his weapon. "Let's keep moving. We're running out of time." As they approached the entrance to the facility, Drake felt a growing sense of unease. Whatever the Quarrens were hiding in there, it wasn't just a weapon. It was something far more dangerous. And they were about to find out exactly what it was. The entrance to the underground facility loomed before Drake and his team, a dark, gaping maw cut into the mountainside. The air around it felt charged, almost alive with the energy surging from within. Drake's instincts screamed at him that they were walking into something far worse than they anticipated. Still, they had no choice but to press on. "Blow the door," Drake ordered. Matthijs and two of the strike team soldiers moved swiftly, placing charges along the reinforced metal entrance. "Charges set," Matthijs called out. "Clear the area." They all backed away, taking cover behind a ridge of rock. The blast shattered the silence with a deafening roar, sending dust and debris flying. The heavy metal doors groaned and toppled inward, revealing a dark corridor bathed in a faint blue glow. "Go, go, go!" Drake barked, leading the charge inside. The corridor was wide and empty, echoing with the sound of their footsteps. Strange, alien symbols and machinery lined the walls, pulsating with energy. It felt like they were walking into the heart of the Quarren war machine. As they moved deeper, Matthijs's voice crackled over the comms. These energy readings are spiking the closer we get. Whatever's powering this facility, it's enormous. Drake glanced over his shoulder. Let's hope we can shut it down before it decides to do whatever it's meant to do. The team pressed on, tension rising with each step. The deeper they ventured, the more Drake felt the weight of the unknown pressing on his chest. Something was wrong. Something felt off. Suddenly, they came to a massive central chamber. It stretched far beyond the limits of their lights, a cavernous room that housed the heart of Project Nexus. In the center of the chamber was a towering obelisk-like structure, pulsating with intense blue energy that hummed and crackled in the air. "Holy hell," Matthijs muttered. "What is that thing?" Drake stared at it, his mind racing to make sense of the alien technology. "Whatever it is, it's the source of the energy readings. We need to shut it down." Before they could move, a voice echoed through the chamber, a deep, alien voice that sent chills down their spines. "You are too late, humans." The team snapped into defensive positions, weapons raised. Drake's heart pounded as he scanned the room, searching for the source of the voice. From the shadows of the chamber, a tall figure stepped forward, draped in flowing dark robes. Its eyes glowed with the same blue energy that pulsed through the obelisk. It was unmistakably Quarren, but there was something different about this one, something far more powerful, far more dangerous. "You think you've won," the figure continued, its voice cold and filled with malice. "But Project Nexus is beyond your comprehension. You will not stop it." Drake narrowed his eyes, stepping forward. "And who the hell are you?" The Quarren's glowing eyes fixed on him. "I am Yarikoth, the one who will usher in the end of your species. Project Nexus is not merely a weapon. It is evolution. The Quarren shall ascend, and your kind will be erased from existence." Drake leveled his rifle at the alien. "Not if we have anything to say about it." Yarikoth smiled a disturbing, inhuman expression. "Foolish humans, you have no idea what you've unleashed." Without warning, the obelisk surged with energy, and the chamber trembled as if the entire facility were waking up. Massive conduits running along the walls began to light up, pulsing with the same energy as the obelisk. The air grew thicker, vibrating with power. "Captain," Matthijs shouted, "the energy levels are off the charts. If this thing goes critical—" "Shut it down," Drake ordered. "We can't let this thing activate." Yarikoth raised a hand, and a wave of force blasted from the obelisk, sending several of the strike team members flying. Drake and Hale dove behind cover as bolts of energy erupted from the walls, tearing through the air. "Take him down," Drake shouted over the comms, firing his rifle at the alien leader. But Yarikoth was too fast. He moved with unnatural speed, dodging their shots effortlessly. Energy crackled around him as he summoned another wave of force, hurling debris at the humans with devastating power. "Captain, we need to focus on the obelisk," Matthijs yelled, firing desperately at Yarikoth to keep him at bay. "If we don't shut that thing down, it's over." Drake ducked behind a fallen console, breathing hard. Yarikoth was too strong, and the obelisk was powering up faster than they could react. Every second they delayed brought them closer to destruction. "Hail!" Drake shouted over the din of battle. "Get to the obelisk. Plant charges. We need to blow it sky high." Hale nodded, gritting his teeth. "Cover me." Drake and Matthijs laid down suppressing fire, forcing Yarikoth to take cover as Hale sprinted toward the obelisk. He moved with the precision of a seasoned soldier, weaving between debris and dodging the arcs of energy shooting from the alien machinery. As Hale reached the base of the obelisk, he planted the charges as fast as his hands could move, securing them to the structure's supports. Sweat poured down his face as the hum of the obelisk grew louder, the entire chamber vibrating with the intensity of its power. "Hurry up, Hale!" Drake shouted, firing another burst of shots at Yarikoth, who was beginning to advance again, his eyes burning with fury. "Almost there," Hale called back. "Just a few more seconds." Yarikoth's voice boomed across the chamber, filled with rage. You cannot stop us. Humanity will fall. Drake gritted his teeth, refusing to back down. We've survived worse than you, Yurikoth. Hale finished planting the charges and sprinted back toward the team. Charges set. We need to get clear before this thing blows. Drake nodded. Everyone fall back. Move. The team scrambled for the exit, dodging the blasts of energy and debris as the facility continued to rumble. Yurikoth's furious roars echoed behind them, but Drake didn't look back. They needed to get out now. As they reached the corridor, Matthijs hit the detonator. The explosion was deafening, a massive shockwave that shook the entire facility to its core. The obelisk was engulfed in fire and debris, its energy field collapsing in on itself. For a brief moment, silence fell. Then, the ground beneath them began to tremble violently. "Run!" Drake shouted, pushing his team forward as the facility started to collapse around them. They sprinted through the crumbling corridors, dodging falling debris and leaping over gaping chasms that opened up in the floor. The energy surging through the walls flickered and died as the obelisk's destruction rippled through the facility's power grid. By the time they reached the entrance, the entire mountainside was collapsing into a massive sinkhole. The team dove onto the waiting drop ships just as the ground gave way beneath them, the facility swallowed by the earth in a cataclysmic eruption of fire and rock. As the drop ships ascended into the sky, Drake watched the destruction unfold below. The heart of Project Nexus was gone, buried beneath the rubble of Valetherin. But something still gnawed at him. Yurikoth had been so confident, so sure that the humans couldn't stop the Quarren plan. The thought lingered in his mind as the ship sped away from the collapsing world. "Captain," Matthijs said quietly, sitting beside him. "Do you think that was it? Do you think we stopped Project Nexus?" Drake shook his head, his expression grim. "I don't know, but I have a feeling this isn't over." As the drop ships broke through the atmosphere, rejoining the fleet in orbit, Drake couldn't shake the feeling that they had only delayed the inevitable. The war with the Quarrens wasn't finished. Not yet. As the drop ships soared into the void of space, the planet of Valetherin became a shrinking ball of ash and ruin in the distance. Inside the ship, the strike team sat in silence, catching their breath, their bodies bruised, and their minds racing with what they had just witnessed. Drake stared out the viewport, his brow furrowed. The destruction of the facility felt like a hollow victory. They had stopped the obelisk, but Yurikoth's chilling words still echoed in his mind. The Quarren leader had been so certain that Project Nexus wasn't truly defeated that something far worse was still coming. Beside him, Matthijs sat, the tablet in his hand. "I've been analyzing the data we pulled before the facility went down," he said, breaking the silence. "There's something you need to see, Captain." Drake turned to him, concern darkening his features. "What did you find?" Matthijs handed him the tablet, his expression grim. "It wasn't just the obelisk. The Nexus project. It's much bigger than we thought." Drake scanned the data, his eyes narrowing. "What the hell is this?" "It's a map," Matthijs explained. "The obelisk was just one of several Nexus nodes. They're spread across Quarren-controlled space, linked together like a network. Yurikoth wasn't lying when he said they were going to ascend. The obelisks are designed to connect with each other, forming a kind of galactic mind-to-hive consciousness." Drake's heart sank. "And we just destroyed one of the nodes." Matthijs nodded slowly. "That's right. And while it may have slowed them down, the other nodes are still out there. If they activate, the Quarrens won't just be a threat to humanity anymore. They'll become something else, something far worse." Drake stood up, pacing the length of the drop ship. His mind raced as he processed the information. This wasn't just a mission to stop a single weapon anymore. It was a race against time. If the Quarrens activated the remaining Nexus nodes, the consequences could be catastrophic. "Contact the fleet," Drake ordered, his voice firm. "We need to regroup and start planning a counterattack. We're going to have to hunt down every one of those Nexus nodes and destroy them." Hale, sitting across from them, looked up. "That's going to take an entire war campaign, Captain. We barely made it out of this one alive. And now you're saying there are more of these things." Drake nodded, his expression hardening. "We don't have a choice, Sergeant. If we don't stop them, the Quarrens will evolve into something we can't fight. We've got to strike now, before they can finish their plan." The ship rumbled as they docked with the Resolute, the flagship of their fleet. As they stepped off the dropship, Drake's mind was already planning their next move. He knew the coming days would be grueling, and the toll on his team would be heavy, but they had no alternative. The moment they entered the command center, General Royce was waiting for them, his stern face a reflection of the gravity of the situation. "What's your report, Captain?" Royce asked, his voice tense. "Did you destroy the facility?" Drake handed him the tablet, his voice steady but grave. "We destroyed the facility, but Project Nexus is bigger than we thought. There are more nodes scattered across Quarren space. They're linked. If the Quarrens activate them all, we're looking at something far worse than just a war. They'll become something unstoppable." Royce's eyes flickered over the data, his jaw tightening. "Damn it." He looked up at Drake. "How much time do we have?" Drake shook his head. "There's no way to know for sure, but if we don't act now, we'll lose our only chance to stop them." The general was silent for a moment, weighing the options in his mind. Finally, he nodded, his resolve hardening. "I'll mobilize the fleet. We'll hunt down these nodes and destroy every last one of them." Drake felt a surge of relief, but also a deep sense of dread. They had stopped the immediate threat, but the war was far from over. As the crew dispersed to prepare for the next phase of the campaign, Drake stayed behind, standing at the viewport of the command center. He watched as the stars stretched out before him, a vast ocean of light and darkness. Somewhere out there, the Quarrens were preparing their next move, and the human fleet would be waiting. Matthijs approached, his expression somber. "Captain, you think we can win this?" Drake turned to him, his face unreadable. "I don't know," he admitted, "but I do know that we'll fight. We'll fight until there's nothing left of them or us." The two men stood in silence for a moment, the weight of their mission pressing down on them. But there was also a spark of hope. Humanity had faced impossible odds before and emerged victorious. They had no intention of giving up now. Hale joined them, crossing his arms as he stared out into the stars. "Well, if it's a fight they want, it's a fight they'll get." Drake smirked. "Damn right. And this time, we're taking the fight to them." The battle against the Quarrens wasn't just a war of survival anymore. It was a war for the future, one that would decide the fate of humanity and the galaxy itself. Drake knew there were more sacrifices to come, more battles to be fought. But as long as there was breath in his lungs and fire in his heart, he wouldn't stop. The Iron Will of Earth wasn't just a title. It was the essence of who they were, humans who would fight, who would endure, and who would win, no matter the cost. The cold, unblinking stars filled the vast expanse of space outside the viewport. Captain Drake stood at the bridge of the Resolute, staring out into the abyss, his face etched with the weight of recent events. The ship was in hyperspace, hurtling through a rip in the fabric of reality toward their next target, the second Nexus node. It had been 3 weeks since Vale Theron's destruction. 3 weeks of intense pursuit, sleepless nights, and endless briefings as they tried to stay one step ahead of the Quarrens. The weight of what they were up against had begun to settle over the crew like a heavy fog. They were no longer just fighting for survival. They were fighting to prevent the rise of a force that could control the galaxy. Drake took a deep breath and turned to Commander Hale, who had been standing quietly at his side. Hale, ever the stoic warrior, had taken the news of more Nexus nodes in stride. The sergeant had a way of treating each mission as if it were just another battle in a never-ending war. But even Hale couldn't hide the slight tension in his shoulders. "We'll be dropping out of hyperspace in 5 minutes, Hale said, his voice gravelly and worn. "Scouts indicate minimal Quarren presence near the node. But we know how that went last time." Drake nodded, his eyes still fixed on the stars. "They'll be waiting for us. They always are." Matthijs, the team's resident tech specialist, entered the bridge, his face buried in a datapad as usual. "Got the latest intel from our scouts," he muttered. "The node is located deep within an asteroid belt. Quarren ships have been seen patrolling the area, but they're light forces. No sign of any Nexus-enhanced ones yet." Drake sighed. Yet? It wasn't just the Quarren soldiers that had them on edge, it was the Nexus-enhanced Quarrens they'd encountered on Vale Theron. They had been stronger, faster, more connected. Fighting them had been like trying to combat a storm. Every move they made felt coordinated, unified by a shared intelligence. The Nexus was evolving them, and each node they encountered only brought them closer to the terrifying future Yurikoth had warned about. "Ready the team," Drake said finally, turning away from the viewport. "We hit hard and fast. No one gets left behind." Hale saluted and strode off, his voice already barking orders to the crew. Matthijs lingered behind for a moment, looking up from his datapad. "Captain, I've been going over the data from the first node again. I think we're missing something." Drake raised an eyebrow. "Missing what?" "These nodes," Matthijs explained, "they aren't just communication hubs. They're part of something bigger. I've been decrypting the Quarren files we got from Vale Theron, and there's mention of a central core, a control nexus. It's not just about spreading their hive mind. There's a core system that links them all together. If we can find it, destroy it, then maybe we can stop the entire Nexus project." Drake frowned. "And where is this core?" Matthijs shook his head. "I don't know yet. The data is fragmented, and we're running out of time. But I'll keep digging. If there's a way to shut this thing down for good, I'll find it." Drake nodded, appreciating the tech specialist's determination. "Good. Keep at it. We're going to need every advantage we can get." Just then, the ship shuddered slightly as it dropped out of hyperspace. The view outside the viewport shifted instantly from the stretched blur of hyperspace to the sharp, rocky expanse of an asteroid field. Floating chunks of rock, some as large as small moons, drifted lazily in the distance, light by the pale light of a distant star. Hale's voice came over the intercom. "Approaching the target now. Quarren patrols are already scrambling. Looks like they knew we were coming." Drake turned to the tactical display, where red blips indicated the incoming Quarren ships. "Prepare for combat. Take us in." The Resolute surged forward, its engines roaring as it weaved through the asteroid belt. On the viewscreen, Drake could see the enemy ships, a swarm of Quarren fighters, their sleek, insect-like forms darting between the rocks. They were small but fast, and in numbers, they were deadly. "Launch fighters," Drake ordered. "Let's clear a path to the node." Within moments, the Resolute's fighter bays opened, and a squadron of human ships shot out into the fray. The battle was on. Drake watched as the fighters engaged the Quarren ships, their laser cannons lighting up the darkness of space. Explosions blossomed in the distance as ships were torn apart, their debris scattering into the asteroid field. The Resolute shuddered as enemy fire began to impact its shields, but the ship pressed on, its powerful cannons blasting through the Quarren lines. "Node coming into range," Hale's voice crackled over the comms. "Looks like they've got defenses. We'll need to disable them before we can send in the ground team." Drake's eyes narrowed as he focused on the tactical display. The node was embedded in one of the larger asteroids, protected by a series of energy shields and turret emplacements. It wasn't going to be easy. "Target their defenses," Drake ordered. "We take down those shields first." The Resolute unleashed a barrage of firepower, its main cannons hammering the Quarren defenses. The shields around the node flickered under the onslaught, but they held firm. "We're going to need more firepower," Matthijs muttered, his fingers flying across his console. "Those shields are too strong for a frontal assault." Drake clenched his jaw. They didn't have time for a prolonged battle. The longer they stayed here, the more likely it was that the Quarrens would send reinforcements. And if any Nexus-enhanced Quarrens showed up, this mission would turn into a slaughter. "Matthijs, is there any way to disable the shields remotely?" Drake asked. Matthijs frowned, tapping away at his datapad. Maybe, if I can get a direct link to their control systems, but I'll need to be on the ground for that. Drake nodded. Then you're going in. Moments later, the dropships were loaded, and Drake, Matthijs, Hale, and a squad of soldiers descended toward the asteroid. The battle above them raged on, the Resolute holding the line against the Quarren fighters as they made their approach. The dropship touched down on the asteroid's surface with a jarring thud. The air was thin, and the ground beneath them was rough and uneven, covered in jagged rocks and dust. "Stay sharp," Drake muttered as he led the team out of the dropship, his weapon at the ready. "Matthijs, get to that control panel. The rest of you, cover him." They moved quickly across the surface, keeping low as enemy fire streaked past them. Quarren soldiers were already swarming the area, their chittering voices echoing through the comms as they opened fire. Matthijs sprinted ahead, his eyes scanning for the control panel that would give him access to the shield systems. Drake and Hale provided cover, taking down any Quarrens that got too close. "There," Matthijs shouted, pointing to a small console embedded in the side of the asteroid. "I'll need a minute." Drake fired another round into an advancing Quarren, his heart pounding. "You've got 30 seconds. Make it count." Matthijs worked quickly, his fingers flying across the console as he bypassed the Quarren security protocols. The air was filled with the crack of gunfire and the shrill cries of the enemy, but Drake's focus remained on the mission. They were so close. "I've got it," Matthijs shouted. "The shields are down." Drake didn't waste a second. "Resolute, this is Drake. Shields are down. Hit that node with everything you've got." From above, the Resolute unleashed a barrage of firepower, its cannons tearing into the now exposed node. The ground beneath them shook as the node's defenses crumbled, and a massive explosion lit up the sky. "Target destroyed," came Hale's voice over the comms. Drake exhaled, the tension in his body easing slightly. But as he looked up at the sky, watching the smoke rise from the wreckage, he knew this was just the beginning. There were still more nodes out there, and the Nexus wasn't finished yet. The aftermath of the explosion sent shockwaves through the asteroid field, causing smaller rocks to tumble into one another, creating a chaotic cascade of debris. Captain Drake felt the rumble beneath his feet, but it did little to quell the rising tension in his chest. They had achieved a significant victory by destroying the Nexus node, but the looming threat of the Quarren forces remained. "Regroup," Drake shouted, waving his hand as the dust settled around them. He scanned the area, ensuring that none of his team had been caught in the explosion. Hale was already moving back toward Matthijs, who was busy shutting down the console. "Let's move, people," Drake barked as he spotted a pair of Quarren fighters darting between the asteroids overhead, likely searching for them. "We don't have much time before they send reinforcements." The team hustled back toward the dropship, adrenaline pumping through their veins. Each step felt like a race against time. The fires from the destroyed node lit the jagged terrain, casting eerie shadows that danced ominously on the ground. Matthijs glanced at the remaining Quarren ships flitting through the asteroid field. "The longer we stay here, the more likely we'll be flanked. I can't guarantee I'll be able to access any other node's systems remotely unless we find a safe spot." Drake gritted his teeth. "Understood. Get us back to the Resolute." The team boarded the dropship, and as soon as the doors sealed shut, Hale called out, "We're clear. Take us up." The ship lifted off, climbing back into the chaos of the battle overhead. Drake could see the Resolute fending off the relentless waves of Quarren fighters, but they were beginning to falter. The alien ships, emboldened by their anger over the loss of the node, swarmed like angry hornets. "Pilot, get us close to the Resolute," Drake ordered, his pulse quickening. "We need to support our ship and clear a path for the rest of the team." As they flew back to the Resolute, the pilot deftly maneuvered through the dogfight, dodging laser fire. Drake's heart raced as he spotted a pair of Quarren ships closing in on their vessel. "Open fire," he yelled, grabbing a laser cannon mounted inside the dropship. He squeezed the trigger, sending bolts of energy streaking into the blackness. hitting one of the Quarren fighters squarely in the side. It spun out of control, bursting into a cloud of shimmering debris. "Nice shot," Hale shouted, his voice filled with adrenaline. But before Drake could respond, the drop ship lurched violently as a Quarren fighter collided with them, sending them spiraling off course. The alarms blared, and the ship began to shudder uncontrollably. "Hold on," the pilot yelled, trying to regain control. Drake braced himself against the console, feeling the drop ship tilt dangerously. "Get us back on course," Drake shouted. "We can't lose the Resolute." With a final burst of effort, the pilot steadied the ship just in time to see the Resolute looming in the distance, its shields flickering under the strain of the assault. Drake's heart sank. They were running out of time. "Engage thrusters," Drake commanded. "We need to make it now." The drop ship surged forward, rocketing toward the Resolute. As they closed in, Drake could see the crew on the deck working feverishly, fending off the relentless attack. His resolve hardened. "Prepare for landing," Drake ordered, gripping the edge of his seat. "We'll deploy right into the thick of it." The dropship docked with the Resolute, and the hatches hissed open. Drake and his team stormed out, weapons raised and ready. They emerged onto the deck, greeted by the sound of battle raging around them. "Captain," Hale shouted, pointing to a group of Quarren fighters trying to breach the ship's defenses. "We've got company." Drake took a moment to assess the situation. The Resolute was taking heavy damage. The crew was spread thin, and they needed every able body to repel the invaders. "Split up. Some of us head to the bridge to assist with command, while the rest of us hold the line here," Drake instructed. With a nod, Hale led half the team toward the bridge, while Drake and the remaining soldiers took position near the entrance. They braced themselves as the Quarren fighters broke through the outer defenses. The next few moments turned into chaos. Drake fired his weapon, taking down one Quarren soldier before another leapt at him. He ducked and rolled, narrowly avoiding the blow, and fired again, hitting his assailant squarely in the chest. The crew worked in sync, their movements fluid and calculated, honed by months of training and battles fought together. They pushed back against the invaders, but the Quarrens kept coming. Each time they thought they had gained the upper hand, a new wave surged forward. "Captain," Matthijs shouted, rushing over. "I've accessed the data for the other nodes. If we can destroy the control nexus, we can stop this madness." Drake nodded, his mind racing. "But we need to find it first. Can you pinpoint its location?" Matthijs shook his head, frustration etching lines across his face. "I can only guess. It's likely on one of the larger Quarren vessels they're coordinating the assault. We need to disrupt their command structure." "Then we need to take down that flagship," Drake said, resolve settling in his chest. "Hale, coordinate with the crew. We're heading out to disable that flagship. Matthijs, you stay with us. We'll need your expertise." As they prepped to move, the lights flickered and alarms blared. "Brace for impact," someone shouted. The Resolute rocked violently as another Quarren ship collided with it. "Let's go," Drake commanded, charging forward toward the exit hatch. They burst into the corridor, ducking behind cover as Quarren soldiers engaged the remaining crew members. Drake peered around the corner, spotting the distinct shape of the Quarren flagship outside the viewport, a massive vessel, its sleek form gleaming ominously in the void of space. "There it is," Drake shouted. "Let's push through." The team advanced, firing at any Quarren that came into view. They fought their way through the ship, determined to reach the airlock leading to the flagship. Each step felt like an eternity as they faced wave after wave of Quarren soldiers, each encounter more dangerous than the last. Finally, they reached the airlock. Drake triggered the opening mechanism, and the heavy doors hissed as they slid apart. Beyond lay the dark expanse of the Quarren flagship, its interior pulsing with an eerie glow. "Stay alert," Drake warned, his voice low. "They'll be ready for us." As they stepped through the airlock, the temperature dropped. The atmosphere inside was charged, the air thick with tension. Drake led the way, cautiously moving down the corridor, every sense heightened. Suddenly, the lights flickered, and a group of Quarren soldiers rounded the corner, their eyes glowing with that unnerving biolight. They opened fire, and Drake shouted, "Take cover!" They ducked behind a wall, bullets whizzing past them. Drake returned fire, but there were too many. He could feel the pressure building. Time was running out. The flagship had to be disabled, or they'd lose everything. "Matthijs," Drake shouted, "can you access their systems from here?" "I'll try," Matthijs replied, already typing furiously on his datapad. "I can't promise I can disable everything, but I can at least create a diversion." "Do it," Drake yelled. "We'll hold them off." Matthijs focused, his fingers racing across the screen as the rest of the team laid down suppressive fire. Quarrens fell under their onslaught, but more kept coming, a relentless tide. "Almost there," Matthijs grunted, sweat beading on his forehead. "Just a few more seconds." Drake felt the weight of their situation crushing down on him. The stakes were too high. They couldn't afford to fail. He stepped out from cover, his weapon blazing, trying to keep the Quarrens at bay. "Cover me," he shouted, charging forward. He ducked and rolled, closing the distance between himself and the enemy. He could see Matthijs working desperately, the concentration etched into his face. "Now," Matthijs shouted suddenly, "I've triggered a system overload. It should create a distraction." An alarm blared, and the lights flickered wildly. Drake seized the moment, surging forward with his team. The Quarrens hesitated, confused by the sudden chaos. It was the opening they needed. Drake pressed forward, leading the charge toward the central control room, where he knew the heart of the flagship lay. They fought through the confusion, pushing the Quarrens back, fighting for every inch of ground. As they neared the control room, they encountered a final wave of Defender's Nexus-enhanced Quarrens, their eyes glowing with a sinister light. They moved with unnerving speed, their reflexes sharpened by the Nexus. "Hold the line," Drake yelled, adrenaline coursing through his veins. He opened fire, taking down one of the enhanced Quarrens before ducking behind cover. "We can't let them stop us." The fight was fierce, but they were outmatched. Drake could feel his body straining under the pressure, his breaths coming in ragged gasps. Just when it seemed like they might falter, Hale surged forward, his weapon roaring. "Get to the control room," Hale shouted. "I'll hold them off." Drake hesitated, but the determination in Hale's eyes pushed him onward. "You better come with us, Hale." "I'll be right behind you," Hale yelled, taking down another Quarren before turning to face the oncoming wave. With a final nod, Drake rushed into the control room, where the massive console pulsed with energy. Matthijs followed closely, his eyes scanning the controls frantically. "I can disrupt their systems from here," Matthijs shouted, "but I need a minute to reroute the power." Drake turned to the door, preparing to defend their position. The Quarrens were right behind them, and he could hear their frenzied chittering as they closed in. "Just do it," Drake yelled, raising his weapon and bracing himself. Matthijs nodded, fingers flying across the controls as the console lit up with data. Drake focused on the door, watching as the first Quarren soldiers burst through, their eyes wild with rage. "Fire!" he shouted, unleashing a torrent of energy bolts. The room erupted in chaos as the team fought to hold their ground, the Quarrens pushing forward with a relentless ferocity. The atmosphere was thick with tension, the air crackling with energy as they struggled against the tide. "Almost there," Matthijs shouted, sweat dripping down his brow. Drake fired again, taking down another Quarren soldier, but their numbers were overwhelming. Just when it felt like the tide was turning against them, Matthijs shouted, "Got it!" With a flick of a switch, the console surged to life, and the lights around them pulsed with an eerie glow. The entire ship shuddered, and Drake could feel the ground beneath him shake. "What did you do?" Drake shouted, his heart racing. "I've triggered a chain reaction in their systems," Matthijs explained. "If we can keep this up, it'll cripple the entire flagship." Drake nodded, determination surging within him. "Then let's make sure they don't stop us." They pressed on, holding the line as the ship began to tremble. The Quarrens, realizing they were losing control, fought harder, their desperation evident. Drake felt the pressure mounting, but he refused to back down. "Keep firing," he shouted, his voice hoarse. "We're not losing this." With every shot fired, he could feel the tide beginning to turn. The Quarrens faltered, and for the first time, Drake felt a glimmer of hope. They were going to win this battle. The flagship trembled violently as the chain reaction Matthijs had initiated spread through its systems. Alarms blared, and the lights flickered ominously, casting eerie shadows across the control room. Drake's heart raced with a mix of adrenaline and urgency. They had to capitalize on this opportunity before it slipped away. "Keep it together, men," Drake shouted, his voice cutting through the chaos. "We're pushing them back." The Quarren soldiers, sensing the tide shifting, redoubled their efforts. A hulking Nexus-enhanced Quarren leapt over the fallen debris, its bioengineered muscles rippling as it charged toward Drake. With a quick instinctual movement, he aimed and fired, hitting the creature square in the chest. It staggered but kept coming. "Matthijs," Drake yelled, scrambling back to avoid the creature's lunge. "Can you do anything about that?" "Just keep it occupied," Matthijs shouted back, his fingers flying over the controls as the console flickered with data. "I'm almost done with the override." Drake dodged another swing from the enhanced Quarren, feeling the rush of air as its fist missed him by inches. He pivoted and fired again, this time aiming for its legs. The shot connected, and the creature crashed to the ground, howling in pain. "Nice shot," Hale called out, reloading his weapon as he kept an eye on the doorway. "But we've got more incoming." Just as Hale spoke, a horde of Quarrens burst into the control room, their snarls echoing off the metallic walls. Drake felt his heart sink for a moment. They were outnumbered, and the pressure was mounting. The ship shuddered again, a sign that their time was running short. "Everyone, fall back to the console," Drake ordered. "We'll form a defensive perimeter." The team retreated to the console, taking cover as the Quarrens advanced. Drake glanced at Matthijs, who was still furiously typing, sweat streaming down his face. "Hang in there, Matthijs," Drake urged, readying his weapon. "You're our only hope." "I'm almost there," Matthijs gasped, hitting a final key. The console emitted a high-pitched whine, and the lights dimmed as a massive surge of energy pulsed through the ship. "Now," Drake shouted, pushing a Quarren soldier aside and aiming toward the control panel. "What do we need to do?" Matthijs, barely able to keep his eyes on the screen, replied, "Activate the self-destruct. We'll take out the flagship and the Quarrens on it." Drake nodded, adrenaline surging through him. "Do it." Matthijs pressed a sequence of buttons, and the screen flashed with warning signs. "Self-destruct in 1 minute. We need to get out of here." The crew sprang into action, pushing back against the advancing Quarrens. Drake fired continuously, his focus razor-sharp as he fought to clear a path. The Quarrens, realizing their command structure was collapsing, fought with reckless abandon, but they were no match for Drake and his team. "Let's go, move it," Hale yelled, dragging one of the fallen Quarren weapons toward the exit. Drake led the way, his heart pounding as he glanced back at Matthijs. "You coming?" "I'll be right behind you," Matthijs shouted, still focused on the controls. As they fought their way back toward the airlock, Drake felt the heat rising behind them. The countdown blared through the ship, a reminder of their impending doom. Quarrens fell around them, but they pressed forward, unwilling to yield. "Almost there," Drake urged, adrenaline coursing through him. He could see the airlock in the distance, a beacon of hope amidst the chaos. They pushed onward, taking out any Quarren that dared to stand in their way. "Get ready," Drake shouted as they neared the airlock. "On my mark." They reached the airlock just as a final wave of Quarrens poured into the corridor, their snarls echoing around them. Drake turned to face the oncoming tide, his weapon raised. "Now," he yelled, opening fire. The team followed suit, unleashing a torrent of energy bolts into the approaching swarm. The airlock door slid open, revealing the vast emptiness of space. The vacuum outside shimmered with the aftermath of the battle, the distant glow of the Resolute visible as they fought for their lives. "Let's go. Get in," Hale shouted, pushing the last of the team through the airlock. Drake took one last look at Matthijs, who was still at the console, eyes locked onto the screen. "Matthijs, we need to move." "I'm almost done," Matthijs replied, panic creeping into his voice. "Just a few more seconds." Drake's heart raced as the Korans surged forward. They had to leave now. "We're not losing you, Matthijs. Get out." With a final keystroke, Matthijs turned and sprinted for the airlock, just as a Koran soldier lunged for him. Drake reacted instinctively, firing at the soldier and hitting it in the chest just as it reached for Matthijs. "Go!" Drake shouted, and Matthijs dove into the airlock, breathing heavily. "Close the door," Hale yelled, and the airlock sealed shut just in time as the Korans surged toward them. The entire ship shuddered violently, and Drake could feel the energy building. "Self-destruct activated, 20 seconds until detonation." Matthijs' voice crackled through the comms. Drake pressed the button to engage the airlock's launch sequence. "We're clear. Prepare for launch." The ship jettisoned away from the flagship, the Koran ship becoming a distant silhouette as they hurtled through space. They watched from the viewport as the flagship began to crackle with energy, the hull glowing ominously. "Hold on," Drake shouted, bracing himself as the ship shook violently. "It's going to blow." A brilliant explosion lit up the darkness as the flagship erupted in a fiery blaze, shockwaves rippling through the surrounding area. The team shielded their eyes from the brilliance of the light, but they couldn't help but feel a sense of triumph. "We did it," Hale shouted, a wide grin spreading across his face. Drake allowed himself a moment of relief, but it was short-lived. "We can't celebrate just yet. We still have to regroup with the Resolute." Matthijs nodded, his breath coming in ragged gasps. "I can navigate us back. They need to know what we found." Drake took a deep breath, steadying himself. "Let's move, team. We have work to do." The ship turned toward the Resolute, the glowing aftermath of their battle fading into the distance. The crew was battered but unbroken, their spirits ignited by the victory they had achieved. As they approached the flagship, they began to discuss their next steps. "Do you think they'll be able to recover from this?" Hale asked, a hint of concern in his voice. "I doubt it," Drake replied, a grim smile crossing his lips. "We've dealt them a heavy blow, but we can't let our guard down. They'll be back." Matthijs chimed in, his expression serious. "We need to analyze the data I collected. There may be more nodes scattered across the system. If we can destroy them all, we can cripple their operations entirely." "Good thinking," Drake said, determination swelling within him. "Let's get back to the Resolute and debrief. We need to prepare for whatever comes next." As they approached the Resolute, Drake couldn't shake the feeling of uncertainty that lingered in the air. They had won this battle, but the war was far from over. He knew that the Korans would regroup and come at them again, possibly with even greater force. But for now, they had triumphed. As they docked with the Resolute, Drake felt a sense of pride swell in his chest. They were more than just a crew. They were a family, united against the chaos that threatened their existence. "All right, team," Drake said as they disembarked from the ship. "Let's go show them what humanity is made of." The Resolute loomed before them, a bastion of strength and hope amidst the vastness of space. As Drake and his team stepped into the docking bay, they were greeted by the sight of their fellow crew members, ready and waiting for news. The atmosphere buzzed with tension and anticipation. Captain Drake, Commander Irvin strode toward them, his expression a mixture of relief and concern. "What happened out there? We saw the explosion from here." Drake took a deep breath, shaking off the adrenaline that still coursed through him. "We found the Koran flagship. Matthijs was able to trigger a self-destruct, but it was a close call. We lost some good men in that fight." The faces of his crew reflected a somber understanding. The cost of victory was always heavy. Commander Irvin nodded, his voice steady. "We need to debrief immediately. The Council is demanding a full report." Of course, Drake replied, the weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders. But Matthijs has critical data that could change the tide of this war. We need to analyze it first. Right. Let's head to the briefing room, Irvin said, leading the way through the bustling corridors of the Resolute. Crew members exchanged hushed whispers, their eyes filled with curiosity and respect for the team that had faced down the Quarren menace. As they reached the briefing room, Drake took a moment to gather his thoughts. The walls were adorned with tactical displays and holographic maps, a constant reminder of the ongoing struggle against the Quarren forces. He glanced around the room, noticing the anxious faces of the senior officers. It was time to deliver the news. "All right, everyone," Drake began, his voice firm. "We've just returned from a successful mission against the Quarren flagship. Matthijs managed to initiate a self-destruct sequence, but we need to stay vigilant. The Quarrens will likely retaliate." "Do we have any intel on their next move?" one officer asked, leaning forward. Matthijs, still catching his breath, stepped up to the holographic console. "I managed to extract data from their systems before we blew it up. It looks like they have several outposts scattered throughout the sector, likely gathering resources and reinforcements." Drake nodded, his mind racing. "If we can hit those outposts before they regroup, we might have a chance to cripple their operations for good." Commander Irvin looked thoughtful. "Do we have enough resources for a full-scale assault? We need to be careful. This could be a trap." "I suggest we send a small strike team to take out the most vulnerable outposts first," Drake proposed. "Hit them fast and hard before they can react." The room buzzed with murmurs of agreement, the officers exchanging glances as they weighed the risks and rewards of such a plan. "We'll need to gather intelligence on each outpost," Matthijs said, his eyes gleaming with determination. "If we can find out what they're working on, we can plan our attack accordingly." "Good thinking," Drake replied, feeling a surge of confidence in his team. "Let's get to work. We don't have much time." The officers began to disperse, each focusing on their assigned tasks. Drake lingered for a moment, watching as Matthijs studied the data he had collected. "You did great out there, Matthijs. I'm proud of you," he said, clapping him on the shoulder. Matthijs looked up, a tired smile breaking through his anxiety. "Thanks, Drake. It was touch and go, but we made it. I just wish we could have saved more." "Every life counts," Drake said, his tone serious. "But we need to focus on the future now. We can't let their sacrifices be in vain." As they delved into the data, a clearer picture of the Quarren operations emerged. Drake could see the structure of their outposts, their resources laid bare like an open wound. With each passing moment, their plan took shape, a strategy designed to turn the tide in their favor. Hours later, the team assembled once more in the briefing room. Drake stood at the head of the table, a holographic map of the sector projected in the center. "Here are the Quarren outposts," he began, pointing to the glowing dots on the map. "We'll target these 3 first. They're isolated and have minimal defenses. We hit fast, hit hard, and then get out before they can react." "What's the plan for extraction?" Irvin asked, studying the map intently. "We'll use the Resolute for a distraction," Drake replied. "While they're focused on the ship, our strike team will move in for the takedown. We'll have a shuttle ready for extraction once we've completed our objectives." "Sounds solid," Hale chimed in. "But we need to make sure we have enough firepower for a quick assault." "I'll assign the necessary support," Irvin stated, tapping at his console. "We'll prepare for the operation at once." Drake felt a surge of anticipation. They were finally taking the fight to the Quarrens, and he was ready to show them what humanity was made of. "Let's move out, team. We don't have time to waste." As they prepped for the mission, Drake found himself reflecting on the events that had led them here. They were not just fighting for survival, they were fighting for the very future of humanity. And with each battle won, they were proving that they would not back down. The next day, the strike team assembled in the hangar bay of the Resolute. Drake surveyed the group Matthijs, Hale, and several other trusted soldiers, all ready to face the dangers ahead. "All right, everyone," Drake called out, gathering their attention. "This mission is critical. We hit fast, we hit hard, and we get out. Follow my lead, and we'll show those Quarrens what it means to underestimate humanity." With a roar of approval, the team boarded the shuttle, their hearts pounding with excitement and determination. As the doors sealed shut, Drake took a deep breath, steeling himself for the battle ahead. This was their moment to shine. "Launch," he commanded, and the shuttle lurched into motion, breaking free from the Resolute and speeding toward the nearest outpost. The stars blurred past them, a backdrop to the chaos they were about to unleash. As they approached the outpost, Drake's pulse quickened. This was it, the moment they had been waiting for. He glanced at Matthijs, who was focused on the sensors, his fingers dancing across the controls. "Matthijs, any sign of activity?" Drake asked, his voice steady. "Not yet," Matthijs replied, peering at the readouts. "But we'll be on top of them in a minute." "Let's keep it that way," Drake said, preparing his weapon. The atmosphere inside the shuttle crackled with anticipation, and the air felt charged with energy. "5 seconds to drop," Matthijs called out, his eyes bright with determination. "Prepare for entry," Drake shouted, adrenaline surging through him. This was their moment to strike, to prove that humanity would not be trifled with. The shuttle shuddered as it hit the atmosphere, the descent rapid and fierce. Drake felt the thrill of battle coursing through him, and as they broke through the clouds, the Quarren outpost came into view, a sprawling complex of steel and energy, vulnerable and ripe for destruction. "Drop now," Drake yelled, and the shuttle doors swung open, revealing the chaos below. With a battle cry, the team leapt from the shuttle, weapons raised as they plunged toward the ground. The wind rushed past them, a roaring testament to their resolve. As they landed with a heavy thud, Drake's feet hit the ground running. "Move out! Engage the enemy!" The world exploded into action as they charged forward, firing their weapons and pushing against the stunned Quarren defenders. The first wave of enemy soldiers scrambled to respond, but Drake and his team were relentless, driving deeper into the heart of the outpost. "Push them back!" Hale shouted, a fierce grin on his face as he took down a Quarren with a well-placed shot. "We've got this." Drake nodded, his determination unwavering. They were winning this battle, and he would do everything in his power to ensure it remained that way. The chaos of battle surged around them, a symphony of gunfire and explosions that echoed in Drake's ears. As he pressed forward, his heart raced with the thrill of combat. They were deep within the Quarren outpost now, their presence a whirlwind of destruction and fury. "Drake, over here!" Hale shouted, waving him over. A group of Quarren soldiers was rallying at the far end of the compound, attempting to mount a counteroffensive. "Let's flank them," Drake replied, his voice steady as he gestured to Matthijs and the others. They sprinted to the side, navigating the debris of the outpost and using it for cover. As they rounded the corner, Drake caught sight of the Quarrens. They were formidable creatures, towering and armored, their sleek, metallic bodies glinting in the harsh lights of the outpost. But Drake's team was prepared. They were armed with the latest in human technology, and with every shot fired, they were proving that the Quarrens had severely underestimated them. "Fire in 3, 2, 1, Drake shouted, and they unleashed a barrage of fire on the surprised Quarrens. The aliens scrambled for cover, but it was too late. Hale's rifle barked as he took out the nearest enemy, a triumphant shout escaping his lips. This is what they get for messing with humanity. Drake felt a rush of adrenaline as they pushed forward, taking out Quarren after Quarren. Each victory fueled their momentum, and with every fallen enemy, the stakes became more personal. They were fighting not just for survival, but for every human who had ever suffered under the Quarren regime. As the last of the Quarren soldiers fell, silence fell over the area, punctuated only by the heavy breaths of Drake and his team. They had done it, they had pushed through and taken the outpost. "Let's gather the intel," Matthijs said, his voice filled with excitement. "If we can find out what they were planning, we might be able to strike a decisive blow." Drake nodded, leading the way into the command center. The room was cluttered with consoles and screens, the glowing displays flickering with data. Drake's eyes scanned the area, his mind racing with the possibilities. "Get to work, Matthijs," he urged. "We need to find anything that could help us against the Quarrens." Matthijs dove into the nearest terminal, his fingers flying over the controls. "There's a lot of data here. It's encrypted, but I think I can crack it," he said, determination shining in his eyes. As Matthijs worked, Drake and Hale stood guard at the entrance, keeping watch for any signs of reinforcements. The tension in the air was palpable. They had won this battle, but the war was far from over. "Keep an eye out for enemy signals," Hale warned, peering out into the dark corridors of the outpost. "They won't take this lightly." Just then, the alarms blared, red lights flashing ominously throughout the command center. Drake's heart sank. "Looks like we've been discovered. Matthijs, how long until you can get that data?" "Just a few more minutes," Matthijs replied, sweat beading on his forehead. "I'm almost there." "Then we hold the line," Drake declared, gripping his weapon tightly. "We've come too far to let them take this back." The sound of heavy footsteps echoed through the hallways, and Drake exchanged a determined glance with Hale. They took up positions near the entrance, ready to defend their ground. As the Quarren reinforcements rounded the corner, a fierce battle erupted once again. Drake and Hale fired their weapons, the sound of gunfire mingling with the roars of the Quarrens. It was chaos, but Drake felt a surge of resolve. They were not going to lose this position. Not now. "Matthijs!" Drake shouted over the din of battle. "We need that data." "I'm almost there," Matthijs shouted back, his fingers flying across the console as he fought against the clock and the relentless assault. Drake felt the weight of the fight pressing down on him. They were outnumbered, but he refused to give in. "Hold the line," he yelled, pushing forward to meet the next wave of enemies. Each Quarren that fell bolstered his resolve. They would not falter. They would not yield. Humanity had come too far to be cowed by the likes of these aliens. Just as they began to feel overwhelmed, the terminal chimed. "Got it," Matthijs exclaimed, a triumphant grin on his face. "I have the data, let's move." Drake felt a surge of hope as he glanced back at Matthijs. "We're out of here, back to the shuttle." The three of them fought their way back through the hallways, a fierce determination propelling them forward. Drake could feel the pressure of the Quarren forces behind them, but they wouldn't stop until they reached the safety of the shuttle. As they burst into the hangar bay, Drake could see the shuttle waiting, the engines humming in anticipation. They sprinted toward it, the sounds of battle still ringing in their ears. Just as they reached the door, the ground shook with an explosion, debris raining down around them. "Get in, now," Drake shouted, urging the others forward. They piled into the shuttle, Matthijs slamming the door shut just as another explosion rocked the hangar. "Go, go," Hale shouted, adrenaline coursing through him as he took his seat. The pilot engaged the thrusters, and the shuttle lifted off, narrowly escaping the chaos of the outpost. As they ascended into space, Drake leaned back in his seat, allowing himself a moment of relief. "We did it," he said, his voice filled with awe. "We actually did it." "Yeah, but this is just the beginning," Matthijs replied, his expression serious as he turned to the console, already analyzing the data they had retrieved. "We've got crucial intel on their operations. This will change everything." Drake watched as Matthijs delved into the information, his mind racing with possibilities. They had the upper hand now. With this data, they could cripple the Quarren forces, potentially ending the war once and for all. As they made their way back to the Resolute, Drake felt a sense of purpose settle over him. They had faced incredible odds, but humanity had risen to the challenge. They were strong, resilient, and ready to fight for their future. Days later, in the briefing room of the Resolute, Drake stood before the assembled crew, a sense of pride swelling within him. "We've come a long way since this war began," he began, his gaze sweeping across the faces of his team. "Thanks to your bravery and determination, we've turned the tide against the Quarrens." The data Matthijs retrieved has given us the opportunity to strike at the heart of their operations. The room erupted in applause, the atmosphere electric with excitement. With this information, we can launch a series of targeted strikes against their key resources, Drake continued, feeling the energy of the room. We will show them that humanity will not be crushed. We will fight, and we will win. The cheers grew louder, a chorus of determination that filled the space. Drake's heart swelled with pride. They were more than just soldiers, they were a family, united in their mission. As the meeting concluded, Drake caught Matthijs's eye, the young man's expression a mix of relief and excitement. "We did it, Drake. We actually did it," Matthijs said, his voice filled with wonder. Drake nodded, a smile breaking across his face. "And we're just getting started. There's a whole galaxy out there waiting for us to show them what humanity can do." Together, they would face whatever challenges lay ahead, forging a path through the stars and proving once and for all that humanity was not to be underestimated. They were a force to be reckoned with, and they would fight for their place in the universe. And as they prepared for the next battle, Drake knew that they would stand together, united in their resolve and ready to face whatever came their way.